Hi, everybody, and welcome. It's Friday, so it must be Kinetics USA's weekly show, Onwards and Upwards. Everything that a global healthcare worker needs to know about living and working in the United States. I am your host, Tanya Friedman, CEO of Kinetics USA, and I am joined today by two of our guests. We are joined by Sang. Hi, Sang, welcome.
Hi, Tanya. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And Maria, welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Good morning.
Nice to see both of you. Today's topic, everybody, is the chance that you get to ask our legal experts all of your immigration questions. It is our lawyers Q&A. So we welcome everybody who's watching around the world. Sang and Maria are going to do a quick introduction, and then we're going to get to all of your questions. If you have questions for our legal panel, please put them into the chat. I have loads of questions sitting here on my desk. So I'm going to try and get through as many questions as we can as we move through this morning's show. So I'd like to start off by having Maria and Sang introduce themselves. Maria, do you want to go ahead and just give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure. So good morning or good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're dialing in from. As Tanya mentioned, my name is Maria Schneider. I'm one of the partner attorneys here at the law firm Musillo and Unkenholt. I've been in practice a little over 10 years and been here at the firm basically since I came out of law school. So I'm excited to be here with all of you and answer your questions today.
Thank you, Maria. And we love working with Maria and the Musillo team. So we're excited to have you here today. Sang, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Hi, my name is Sang Shin, and I am a partner at the law firm of Jackson Walker. I've also been practicing for about 10 years as well, just like Maria, and just happy to be here and provide any information we can.
Thank you, Sang. We are excited to have you join us, and we love working with both of you. So today's topic, as I said, is our lawyers Q&A. Once a month, we have our lawyers on. We are grateful for their time. We know how busy they are. So we're going to get straight to the questions ahead of us. Immigration is a very complicated, confusing process, not just for nurses, but even for the employers in the United States. There were a lot of questions, and I see we have a lot of people joining us today. Please, if you have questions, put your questions into the chat. So KK is saying, hi, is this a live video? KK, yes, it's live now. Arlene is watching from Jamaica. Tina is saying hi. Kabaya is, I apply, but no answer why. Oh my goodness, Kabaya, I apologize for that. I know our team are inundated, but we will definitely get back to you as soon as possible. Eileen is in Saudi, originally from the Philippines. Samuel is asking about midwives. Samuel, you need to be an RN to apply. Denise is from Turkey. CJ is from UK. Nidin is, can I apply as an enrolled nurse in the US? Maria, so let's start with that question. Can an enrolled nurse apply, or do you have to be a registered nurse to apply for the US?
You could apply for an F1 student visa if you wanted to come to school in the US, but in order to be sponsored by an employer, you would have to be an RN. The law requires that you either have passed the NCLEX, have a license, or have a CGF&S certificate, which shows you've taken the sort of predictor NCLEX exam. So most of the time you need to have completed your degree in order to sit for the NCLEX. And of course, the Kinetics group can help you navigate that process to prepare for the exam and be ready to take it.
Thank you, Maria. And it certainly is a process. We have on our website, everybody, our success path. The success path really gives you the roadmap of how to go about coming to the United States if you are a registered nurse. So please check that out on the Kinetics USA website. It gives you step by step by step, where do you start if you're like Nidin or many viewers around the world who are just so like overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start. There's licensing, there's immigration, there's just so much to be covered. So just to run through that real quick, the first step, if you are a registered nurse, is to pass your NCLEX exam. Please feel free to apply to Kinetics USA website application. Sorry about that. And our team are on hand to speak to you and see if you might even be qualified for the NCLEX scholarship. for selected nurses. If once you pass the NCLEX, we can prepare you for the interview. We have hundreds of interviewers all over the world, all over the United States that are interviewing right now. And once you have interviewed, if you go back to that success path, you will be able to see that the next step on the success path is right where we are now with our legal immigration team is the visa framework. So if you're coming on a TN visa or a green card, we would be helping you with the next step with a license endorsement, English proficiency exam if that's required. Then you got your get ready game plan, lots of tools that Kinetics can provide you with, as well as your arrival sequence and enjoy and prosper. So for those nurses who don't know where to start, that's a good place. Sang, question for you is about the visa bulletin. We have many questions from nurses asking, what is the visa bulletin exactly? Can you explain that? It's very confusing. And also, can you tell us about the latest visa bulletin? And I think we've got a slide about that too.
Great, thank you. If you can pull that slide up. I try my best to explain the visa bulletin. I think one of my colleagues in the past described it as kind of your ticket in the deli line. And right now the U.S. immigration laws only allow a certain number of individuals per country each year into the United States for green card or immigrant visa purposes. And the way they break it down is based upon your preference categories. So for example, employment-based, you have preference category 1, 2, and 3. So many times our registered nurses are going to fall under EB3. And then they also look at the various countries around the world. So this is the latest October 2022 bulletin. And you have, it says row, which means the countries. So you have the Philippines, India, China, some of the countries where there are the most foreign nationals that are entering the United States. And then you have everybody else, right? So, the Philippines, for example, a high area where we see a lot of nurses. You see a lot of, backlog sometimes in certain categories. But for October, you'll see here on this chart that the Philippines is current. And then you have, let's say, India and China that have dates that are tied to it. And how I can explain that is that whenever we file or whenever a immigrant visa is filed for you on your behalf, you receive what they call a priority date. And so, Tanya, if you can just go back to that chart for a second, that priority date, for example, in China or India, let's say it says April 1st, 2012. And how you read that is if you have a priority date that was on or before April 1st of 2012 in India, for example, then you may apply for an immigrant visa or a green card. Luckily for nurses in the Philippines, it's current right now, which means that there's no wait time, so to speak, from filing a immigrant visa petition and then ultimately getting scheduled for an appointment at the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. And when I say no wait time, I mean no wait time in terms of filing. But I'm sure that we'll explore a little bit more on this call that there still are some associated wait times, but not for filing for the actual visa.
Okay, thank you, Sang. So that gives us a very clear explanation of the visa bulletin. And the good news is that except for India and China, all other countries are current right now, which means if you are watching this show for the first time, you're thinking about coming to the United States, this is the time to do it. The visa bulletin is current, which means that we can file for you, and we need you to pass your NCLEX exam if you are a registered nurse. Maria, we have a question here from Emily who's asking, hello, morning, 2 questions. Can I work on my previous social security number from my previous non-immigrant status while my adjustment of status is pending?
Yes, so you will have one social security number that's issued for sort of all time. It doesn't change your social security number when your immigration status changes. But you cannot work just based solely on a social security number. You have to have work authorization from the immigration service sort of in connection with your social security number. So depending what that previous status was, you may have maybe OPT or a TN or some other type of work authorization. So your social security number would not change, but your type of work authorization may change over time as you apply for different immigration benefits with a different employer.
Okay, so there you go, Emily. Maria's answered your question. We have many people who are putting questions into the chat. Wow, they are coming fast and furious. If you have a question for the expert legal panel, please put it into the chat, and also put in where you're from, which country you're watching from. It's so fun to see all our viewers all over the world, not just registered nurses, but also lots of allied healthcare workers that are putting questions into the chat. Saying we have a question from Frederick. Frederick is asking, can a dependent of an H-1 visa holder work in the United States? And if so, how?
Yeah, well, that is actually has been a topic of debate for quite some time. As you all know, for certain temporary visas, there is an ability to obtain work authorization for spouses, and so that applies to certain visa types. Unfortunately, the H-1B, most H-4 spouses may not be employed or have work authorization unless they have or fit into a very narrow window or an exception. So, for example, we talked about the visa bulletin earlier. If an individual has filed for, let's say, the immigrant visa petition, and they can't file for the last step of the green card, whether that's the adjustment of status or a visa petition abroad, because, or especially in the adjustment of status scenario, if they can't file for that yet because the priority dates are backlogged, that's an exception where an H-4 or the dependent of an H-1B may apply for employment work authorization. But other than that, generally, the H-4 spouse of an H-1B is not usually blessed or is not on the blessed list for employment work authorization.
Okay, so thank you, Sang. Frederick, I hope that answers your question. Maria, we have a question here from Anna. Anna is asking, if I have my I-140 file today, how long will it take me to get to the consulate? And my second question is, what are we seeing on the delays at the consulates?
Yeah, so I think she hit on the main sticking point right there with the delays with the consulates. So there's sort of two ways to file an I-140, and that would be, excuse me, up to your employer which pathway they choose. Excuse me. The first pathway would be under sort of regular standard processing. The timeframes we're seeing on that are anywhere between like 9 months to a year. So that would be that you just submit the I-140 and you wait for the Immigration Service to sort of get to it in the normal queue of cases they're reviewing. The second option, and what we encourage a lot of our clients to do, is file under premium processing, which is the government's expedited program. So the employer does have to pay a higher fee for that, but then we get an answer within 2 weeks of filing, within 15 days, 2 weeks. So we would know if there's an RFE or an approval issued very quickly. Once the I-140 is approved, it's then sent to the NVC, which is a part of the Department of State's, the National Visa Center, or NVC. They collect some documents from the nurse, some civil documents, and then those are sent on to the embassy, and the embassy will schedule the interview. And that's the point that she hit on, is the biggest delay right now we're seeing is getting the embassy to actually schedule the interview or have available openings where you could self-schedule in some locations. There's just a huge backlog of folks waiting for interviews because of COVID, and the embassies are still trying to work through that backlog. And then in addition, there's been a lot of people asking for expedites, rightfully so, especially as nurses that are trying to come here and work to help with COVID survivors and people that are struggling with COVID. But unfortunately, that's also created some additional work on the part of the embassy. So it really depends on which embassy or consulate you're applying to and what their caseload looks like. You might not be surprised to learn that, of course, Manila has a large caseload of nurses applying to come to the U.S., so there might be a larger backlog there than at other places in like the Middle East, maybe in Abu Dhabi or Qatar or other embassy locations where there just aren't as many applicants coming through. So it's difficult to say exactly how long the backlog would be without knowing which location you're applying to and kind of what the timing looks like on your particular case.
So is the short answer that we can't give a specific answer?
Yes, I think that's fair. Yeah, the I-140 processing, as I mentioned, if you pay the fee, they do expedite it. But with the embassies, unfortunately, there's no way to make that expedite request in the same fashion.
Okay. And I think that's what's so hard for so many candidates, because they see, maybe they have friends that are going through the process, maybe they're going through another embassy, or maybe their employer didn't pay premium processing. So it's not comparing apples and apples, correct?
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, Sang, we have a question from Marwin. Marwin is asking, and it's actually related to Maria's question, what is an expedite? I've heard people talk about this, and does it actually work?
So meaning expedite in terms of, well, I think Maria touched on the main expedite, which is the I-140, the first part. So you are able to file what we call an expedite or premium processing with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services here in the United States. And yeah, we're with Maria, making sure that our employers know to try and premium process when able, so that they can receive a decision on that first part, the I-140, within a 15-day time frame. So that's always great. But then there's another expedite that we try to do every now and then. These days, it's become increasingly more difficult because of the backlog that was just mentioned. But once the National Visa Center has sent the information over to the embassy where the nurses live, there is an opportunity to try and expedite or ask the embassy for a faster appointment time. And we used to see a lot of those successfully. I've seen just kind of, I get them every now and then sporadically, but basically it's when we or the nurse or even the employer reaches out to the embassy and says, hey, can you guys just put us to the front of the line? There's a need here in the United States, and we need to get there fast. And because of the backlogs, because so many people are now requesting expedites, I think the embassy officials are kind of saying, who do we put first when everyone's requesting an expedite? So those are two expedites that I see. One is obviously a process that's already ingrained through the I-140, whereas the expedite process for the visa appointments, those are kind of hit or miss at times.
Yeah. I think, Maria, I don't know, would you agree with saying, are you seeing also kind of a hit and miss with at the embassies?
Yes, definitely. And sometimes, unfortunately, which is terribly confusing for the nurses, the expedite request gets approved, but then we still don't have an interview date for 7 months. So that's, I'm sure, confusing, frustrating. And like you mentioned, Tanya, when you have friends in other locations or going through the same process, they may be treated differently, and not because they're doing anything right and you're doing something wrong. It's just the embassy is inconsistent, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that creates a lot of frustration for many healthcare workers. I think just one thing to mention from the Kinetics USA side, every one of the Kinetics USA employers that sponsor and employ international healthcare workers pay premium processing. So as everybody knows, Kinetics USA are direct hire, which means we don't sponsor and employ the nurses or healthcare workers ourselves. They're employed and sponsored directly by the facility themselves. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, Gina has a question. Question from Zella. Hi, Tanya. My batchmates already have a ready CEAC status. We submitted the DS-260 almost the same date, 1 day apart. So Maria, this is what we're talking about when somebody's got a friend who went through it and now they've got different timings. I follow up my case manager and I was informed that my DS-260 was not submitted, but I received a confirmation email that I did. What can I do to fix this? Oh, I haven't heard of this before. Maria?
I would probably want to look at that email specifically and check, kind of if the Department of State actually did confirm the receipt of the DS-260. Usually if they don't receive it, but they have your civil documents and your fee bill payment, then the NVC will issue a notice essentially saying, we've got kind of two parts of the three. We've got the fee bill payment, we've got your civil documents, but we need your DS-260. So if you have a confirmation that they've already received it, then hopefully you could just kind of forward that on to the NVC and then the case would move forward.
Okay. So hopefully that can be sorted out for I don't know if it's Gina or Zella. It's Zella. Marin is saying, hi, Brens has a question. Watching from the Philippines, many nurses who are documentary complete are having a hard time in getting interview appointments through the CGI Federal. Saying, can you explain to everybody what the CGI Federal is and why it's so difficult to get appointment times?
I want to say, I think CGI Federal is probably one of those third-party agencies that help with the scheduling of appointments and whatnot. I wouldn't be able to speak to the CGI Federal part directly, although I will just say in general, those third-party agencies that help schedule appointments are just kind of all over the place. But documentally qualified, what we see is, once you are documentally qualified, I believe the embassy will reach out and ask you to, schedule an appointment at that point. So if we're seeing some sort of issue with CGI Federal at that point, I know that those agencies usually have a customer service number. And I know that when I've called on behalf of some clients and they're having difficulty, they've been pretty helpful in working through any technical aspects. So it could be technical, it could be, as Maria mentioned, a backlog. You would just have to kind of dig into it to see what's going on. But if you're having difficulty in general, I would refer to that CGI Federal customer service line on their website.
Thank you, Sang. Maria, anything to add to that in terms of the booking in Manila?
Yeah, I would just say to check back frequently. There's regularly new appointments made available as the embassies. There was a hiring freeze with the Department of State that's now been removed. So they are trying to get more officers out in the field, but that's obviously a slow process to get them hired and trained and then sent to whatever location they're going to. And so there's new officers coming and new appointments opening up because of that. And then also, if someone cancels their appointment for whatever reason, there may be a cancellation, just like if you were going to a doctor's office or something and someone canceled, you could take their spot. So definitely checking back frequently, once or twice a day or at least every day to see if there are any appointments that open up that are earlier than what you've already scheduled. But I know we have quite a few that have scheduled into October, so it's not uncommon that your appointment date would be at least a month out from the day that you select it on the site.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice, Maria, is to consistently check back. I know when we were in the Philippines a few weeks ago, we had many nurses who were telling us that they would just sit on that website and just try, and eventually have success. So it's incredibly frustrating. But we have seen nurses just, if you're consistent and you just put in that time, there's no easy way around it, but we are seeing people getting results on that. One thing just to mention, Brent, also is that all of the Kinetics USA employers have a government affairs department. And if we see that somebody has their DQ, they are documentary qualified, and they're not getting a consular interview, we will flag those people with the government affairs department at the various hospitals, and they will connect with the senators' offices and their local congressmen, and we are seeing a lot of success with that as another route to try and help get the interviews and get around the backlog that we're seeing in the consulates. Andrea says, hi, how can Kinetics help in the processing of an EAD of my husband who is currently on an H4 visa?
You want to take that, Tanya? How does Kinetics help? I know Kinetics works with that.
I think, yes, Andrea, so we would be able to find you the position, but I think maybe, Andrea, is saying you can maybe speak to the immigration piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think, immigration attorneys are able to file for those EAD cards that are associated with the H4. So it's a filing with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And yeah, it's a relatively straightforward process, but there's a document called the I-765, and you just file it. And unfortunately, I will say that there's a little bit of a wait time on employment authorization documents right now. I think the latest has been, anywhere from 9 to 12 months, if we're being conservative. But yeah, so I mean, it's a straightforward process. So the attorney's offices can easily help with those types of processes.
Thank you. Sang, so I see we've got a lot of questions, and I've got so many questions in front of me right now. So I'm going to try zip through. So I apologize if I'm not asking a question that you posted, but if we maybe already covered that question. So Marin has a question, Maria. I'm documentary qualified on the 1st of March. I'm an Indian national, but my state of chargeability is Kuwait. So Maria, maybe you can also just explain to everybody who's watching what chargeability means. Hence, my priority date has always been current. My several other Filipino colleagues who are DQ'd during July and August were given interview appointments in the Abu Dhabi embassy, but my case is still with the NBC. What could be the reason for this delay? Is there something that has to be done?
So I'll take the first part that's maybe a little bit easier to answer about the chargeability. So before, Sang was describing the visa bulletin quite well about the different categories that pretty much all nurses file into the EB3 category, and then it kind of breaks it out by those countries. So the breakdown by country goes by your country of birth. The way that you can sort of change that, obviously you can't change where you were born, unfortunately, but the way that you could possibly take advantage of another country's processing time would be if you were married to someone who was born in another country. So in this particular case, it sounds like maybe this is someone either she was born in Kuwait, even though she's an Indian citizen, or she was born in India and then her spouse was born in Kuwait. So in either one of those situations, she would fall under that ROW or rest of the world category and not under India, which is the rest of the world category is quite a bit faster than the Indian category, but like 10 years quicker. So once you've sort of secured your priority date, you have your right country of chargeability listed, then the case just proceeds through that process we were discussing before, that the I-140 gets approved, you submit your civil docs to the NVC. As long as that's documentarily qualified or DQ'd, then the case should proceed on to the embassy. In this case, I believe she said she was DQ'd in March and has still not received an interview date. I would probably at this point maybe want to reach out to the NVC and make sure that everything was kind of in order and ready to go. And then, there's no harm in reaching out to the embassy to find out what the holdup might be to get an interview. I'm not sure if she's in Kuwait now or somewhere else, but, we have had some success. We were just talking about the expedites in reaching out to the embassy directly and just kind of saying, hey, my case seems to have been sort of lost in the shuffle, if you will. And, I'd like to schedule an interview as soon as possible. The embassy may unfortunately respond back and just say, no, sorry, it's still here. It's in the queue. But at least you can take that proactive step to maybe alleviate some of your worry and concern to find out if there's any holdup, as you said, maybe on the documents or something you could do to push the case forward.
Okay. So Marin, hopefully that is helpful for you. We know that it's very upsetting and disappointing when you see so many delays, but we are seeing movement at the consulates. We are seeing things getting better. Both Maria and Sang are nodding. So it's really a matter of trying all different avenues, whether it's contacting the embassy, contacting the consulate. Oh my goodness, I can't speak this morning. And also going through, if you a Kinetics USA nurse, we can go through the Government Affairs Department of the healthcare facility as well to try and push your case through the process. So Dr. Elissa is a British Aussie in California. Welcome, Dr. Elissa. Leanne is tagging a friend. And please tag your friends for the show. This show is our way of paying it forward for you. There's so much misinformation and rumor about immigration. So this is our legal experts' way of being there for you, giving you an hour to ask your questions, free information for you. So tag your friends, pay it forward. Thank you, Leanne, for doing that. Adajoro is, can I apply as a diploma holder? Yes, Adajoro. We have employers that will sponsor you for a green card if you are a diploma nurse. However, you will need to have passed the NCLEX exam and obviously the English. CJ has a question about the OET. If you have questions about the OET, please check out previous shows on Kinetics USA show Onwards and Upwards. We've done, I think, 2 or 3 shows on the OET. On the 1st of August, the CGFNS changed their ruling, and nurses can now do not just the IELTS or the TOEFL, but other exams like the OET. So if you have questions about the OET, please check out those previous shows. There's a lot of information that we provide for you. Okay, let me see. We have a question here from Carla saying, Carla is saying, I'd like to know when is the best time to resign from my current employer? I am waiting for my consular interview.
That's always a tricky question of when, immigration attorneys are giving advice on when you should resign from a current job. I've had this question come up a couple times, and I think where it's usually a conversation, right, with the nurse and their own kind of circumstances. I think in general, most nurses, they land is once they have that immigrant visa in hand. And how you get that immigrant visa in hand is you go for your interview, and it goes successfully well, and then all of a sudden you have that immigrant visa stamp in your passport. That immigrant visa stamp, you have about 6 months of time to use to enter the United States. And so by coordinating with your new employer in the U.S., I would say wait till you get your immigrant visa, and then put in your notice where you need to, because you have that 6-month period to work out kind of your situation of getting to the United States, and also coordinate with your employer on when that start date is going to be. The great thing with many of the employers that I work with is, obviously they need the nurses ASAP, but they're very flexible and understanding because we are going from one place and entering the United States, right? So I would say, just in general, where most of those conversations have gone is just waiting till the process is finished and having that immigrant visa in hand.
Yeah, I think I would definitely support that saying, and say, you need to wait until you've got your immigrant petition in your hand, in your passport, before you resign. I think that it's very risky to resign before that. We know that for many nurses, you have a notice period, and employers here in the US, as Sang said, know and understand that. They obviously want to get you to the US as quickly as possible, but rather just to be, to be safe and sure, don't resign until you have already got your stamp and you've got your immigrant petition to come through to the United States. Okay, so we have a question. Oh, we have Isis saying hi, Anna. Hi, Anna. We know Anna well. Isis saying, is this video live? And yes, it's live, Ice. We have a question here from John. So John is asking, I have one question regarding the fiscal year. Once I heard that the green cards for 2022 finished September 7th. The ones that didn't get by that time are supposed to wait for the next fiscal year, which starts October 1st. How does that work? And a question about the time NVC takes to DQ an applicant. It's been more than 2 months for me already. So Maria, there's a lot of questions in there from John.
Yes, yeah. But good questions. Very yes, so the first part about the visa bulletin and the numbers being used up. So there was some reporting that the numbers specifically for Indian nationals had been used earlier in the month of September. There's been no official announcement that I've seen that that's the case, but it was reported in several different sort of side sources without going too far into the details. So it wouldn't affect anyone who was born in the Philippines or anywhere other than India or China potentially. But essentially it goes back again to the visa bulletin and what Sang was describing earlier in the hour, that there's a certain limited number of green cards each year, and those are divided up sort of between all the applicants. No one certain country can take more than 7% of that whole green card pool. And so when they reach that 7%, that's when we start to see the cutoff date, or what we call retrogression. And so essentially what the information that was coming out was saying that the Indian national category had already reached its maximum for this fiscal year as of September 7th. And then, as the questioner was mentioning, the fiscal year begins again on October 1st. And so there's sort of a fresh pot or fresh group of green cards made available. And so that would kind of reset the count in some way of thinking. With respect to how long it takes a case to be documentarily qualified, I would say we're seeing probably anywhere between 60 to 90 days, maybe even a little bit longer. The NVC does post their what they call time frames on their website, so you can refer to that if you're concerned that your you're outside of the time frame. If you're only a couple of days outside of their posted time frame, then I probably would just wait and let them get to your case. If it's several weeks or a month outside of their posted time frame, that's another time when you may want to use some of those resources Tanya was mentioning before, of reaching out to the NVC, reaching out through the government affairs division sort of at your employer, maybe talking with your attorney about a way to check if the case is moving forward. There are ways to contact the NVC, but again, if it's still within their normal posted processing time, it's probably going to slow the process down, frankly, if you ask for too many updates, because they'll have to retrieve your case to review it, and then it will sort of go to the back of the line. So if it's still within the posted processing time, I'd recommend just holding tight and trying to be patient. I know that's hard to do in this process, but if you are outside of their posted processing time, it may be time to use one of those other avenues to reach out and push the case forward.
Okay, thank you, Maria. A lot of good tips and pointers in there. Justina has a question saying, please, Tanya, I would love to know if a J1 visa can be adjusted to the green card, and does Kinetics file for this type of visa? Saying, can a J1 visa, can we do an adjustment of status for it? First of all, maybe explain to everybody what a J1 visa is, and then can we do an adjustment of status?
Yeah, so it's actually a good question. J1 visas are temporary visas that have been stated are generally for cultural exchange. So a lot of times we see trainees, internships, other categories of J1 individuals that are working either at medical institutions or other organizations. But I would say it depends on whether, if an individual is in the United States on a J1 visa and is looking for an adjustment of status, it really depends on whether that can happen, primarily because since the J1 visa is intended to be, like I said, a cultural exchange visa, the ultimate intent of that J1 visa holder must be to eventually go home, right? And actually should be to go home. And so depending on how the J1 is structured, and usually it's through a third-party sponsoring organization, there may be what we call a 2-year foreign residency requirement that is attached to that J1. And in short, what that means is you can't get certain types of visas like an H or adjust status in the United States until that 2-year foreign residency requirement is met, meaning go back home and spend 2 years at home before applying again, or if that 2-year foreign residency requirement is waived. And whether it's waived or not, without getting into specifics, is really based upon each individual circumstance. So the short answer is it may be possible, but it just depends upon the circumstances and if that 2-year foreign residency requirement attaches.
Okay, thank you, Sang. So there you go, Justina. So we have a question here from Marlene. Marlene is asking, my I-140 was filed with the Texas Service Center in February, and I'm still waiting for the case to be it was approved. I'm still waiting for the case to be transferred. I've heard that there were delays with the Texas Service Center. Maria, have you seen that? Those kinds of cases happening with the Texas Service Center, and what are you seeing right now?
Yeah, so nothing specific to Texas, but we've definitely had some cases where they were just delayed in getting to the NVC. I think there's a couple of things you can do to sort of check on that if it's been some time. Again, the NVC posts their timeframes on their website, so it will say, like, once the NVC receives the case from the USCIS, how long it will take the NVC to create a case for you and to send out your fee bills. So first thing to do would be to check if your case is still within that processing time. If it is not, which it sounds like in this case it's not, then there's a couple different ways you can sort of follow up. The first would be to reach out to both the USCIS and the NVC to determine. Sometimes the USCIS sort of forgets to send it to the NVC, which could be from Texas or any of the other service centers. And then also you want to make sure that the NVC actually received the file, because we have seen in past cases sometimes where the USCIS says they sent it, but the NVC has no record of receiving it, and we sort of have to follow the file down and figure out where it got misplaced in the process. Something else that we've had some success with recently is there's also a office of the USCIS Ombudsman, which is kind of like a third-party office, but they help alleviate any kind of case issues at the USCIS that come about. They have a list of specific areas they can help with on their website. And I found some success recently in reaching out to the Ombudsman and having them help, specifically when like a case like this, when it's delayed getting to the NVC or it seems to be sort of lost in transmission between the USCIS and the NVC. So that might be one place to start. There's also ways to contact the NVC to sort of have them research the issue. And then there's also, again, always you can reach out to a congressperson through the Government Affairs Division to ask that they become involved and kind of help follow the file down and figure out maybe what's happened, that it's not been been directed through the process timely.
Yeah, I really feel for Marlene and any candidates that have gone through this unfortunate situation. We did have a few cases that were filed in the kind of January, February timeframe, which was very unfortunate and incredibly frustrating. But we found going through government affairs has really been very helpful, as well as all the other measures that Maria's just gone through. So if you have been a nurse who's unfortunately had this kind of experience, please reach out to your employer. Please reach out to your lawyer, as well as to Kinetics if you're a Kinetics nurse, because we have seen success with this, and hopefully this is not going to be something that we continue to see. Saber has a question saying about medical lab scientists. Can you talk to us a little bit about the immigration piece of how a medical lab scientist would be able to come to the United States?
Yes, great question. And I know that we've been talking about nurses a lot, and we've been speaking about kind of the Schedule A process, where we file what we call a document I-140 with USCIS. And then once that is approved, it goes to the embassy for the appointment. And that's because nurses have been pre-blessed by our government as an area that it has a shortage. There's a need for it, right? So they're on this kind of schedule of occupations where they can get away from the traditional norms of filing for an immigrant visa or green card. So for your position, the medical technicians and technologists, there would be an additional step, and that step is called the perm labor certification. And so that would be, it becomes a 3-step process. And what's required in the perm labor certification is your employer in the U.S. Would file for a labor certification with the U.S. Department of Labor by testing in an open market, and they'd have to try to find that there are no qualified, able, willing, or available U.S. workers, which they would likely be able to do with your position. And once that is certified, then you can move forward with filing for the I-140 or immigrant visa petition with USCIS, and then of course the immigrant visa petition. So it's a little bit of there's an extra step involved, but it's still a possibility.
Okay, thank you, Sang. So, and Saber, please keep watching, because we have a show coming up dedicated to Allied, where we'll be talking about medical lab scientists, medical lab technologists, medical lab technicians, and answering a lot of your questions in that regard. Maria, we have some employers that qualify for an H1 cap exemption in order to sponsor medical lab scientists. Can you talk a little bit about that process and who would qualify for that?
Sure. So typically when you're filing an H-1B, we should maybe say, as Sang mentioned, we've been talking a lot about nurses. Typically nurses don't qualify for an H-1B, do not qualify. The reason is that the H-1B sort of program dictates that the position in the U.S. that you're applying for has to require at least a bachelor's degree or higher. And so for most sort of floor nurse positions, that's unfortunately not the case. If it was a charge nurse or a nurse supervisor, that might be different. But for most nursing positions, an H-1B is not an option. So for medical technologists, though, most of those positions do require a bachelor's degree in medical technology, medical laboratory science, something of that nature. So almost all H-1Bs are subject to the H-1B cap, or it's sometimes called H-1B lottery. And essentially what that means is there are 85,000 H-1Bs every year, every fiscal year. As we mentioned before, the government's fiscal year starts on October 1st. And those the H-1Bs are allotted based on the lottery system, because the Immigration Service always receives more applications for those H-1Bs than there are spots available. So they run a lottery to determine which ones are selected and which ones are unfortunately just sent back to the employer, and they say, try again next year and go through the lottery process again. So a CAP exempt employer has the advantage that they are exempt from that lottery. And the way that an employer becomes CAP exempt, there's a couple different sort of varieties. It probably doesn't matter too much, but it would be something you'd want to discuss with your hospital. If they are, in fact, a CAP exempt employer, or your sponsor, I guess it may not necessarily be a hospital. But many hospitals can qualify for the CAP exemption if they're non-for-profit and they have relationships with local universities where they're maybe teaching students at their hospital. That's one way we commonly see that hospitals can be exempt from that H-1B cap. So if they are exempt, then they don't have to file through that lottery. They can file an H-1B basically at any time of the year, and the government would just approve the case, assuming, of course, all the other requirements are met. And then the applicant, the medical technologist who's overseas, could apply for the H-1B visa in November, in January, and March, it doesn't matter. Whereas those who are going through the lottery, there's a very specific timeline based off the government's fiscal year that has to be followed. So that's really the main advantage, is that you don't have to go through that lottery process. So there's no risk that your case might not get selected in the lottery. And then also that you can apply any time of the year for the H-1B, regardless of when the lottery is taking place.
Okay, so there are options for medical lab scientists, medical lab technologists, and it's really important to educate yourself about that. Saber, and I see we have some other medical lab technologists. We've got Samuel also watching. Please keep watching. Oh, we've got Mohammed also watching. I see a lot of people on the allied side. Please keep watching. We're going to have a whole show dedicated to this topic. There's a lot of interest from people all over the world. And if you have an idea of what you want to hear about on an Onwards and Upwards show, please put that into the chat. We love to get your comments, your feedback, your input, and we would be happy to do a show on whatever topic you are interested in and feel would be important for you. Dane is from Australia, Jalal from Iraq. Alex has a question. He's from Israel to do with the IELTS or the TOEFL. Alex, please go ahead and watch. We have many Onwards and Upwards shows on this topic. There was a change, as I mentioned, the 1st of August from the CGFNS, they are now also offering nurses to do other English tests if you are not trained in English as well, such as OET or Pearson VUE. And please check out the Kinetics College every Monday, because we have free classes for nurses on those different language tests. Timothy from Philippines, Joy is watching, Samuel's also medical technologist. Please go ahead and apply to Kinetics USA. We have many medical technologist positions from all over the United States. Dane has, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, has a question about the E3 visa for Australians. Maria, can we use that visa for nurses?
So in the past we have, but really the answer is probably no. The reason is that the E3 has that same requirement that I mentioned about the H-1B, that the job has to require a bachelor's degree. So I know maybe 5 or 10 years ago we were able to get some nurses in on E3s, but in my experience, the embassies in Australia have really kind of cut that line off. So again, if it's a charge nurse, a nurse educator, a nurse supervisor, maybe some kind of a special position where it does require a bachelor's in nursing or greater, then that position would qualify for an E3. But if it's just sort of an entry level floor nurse position that requires an associate's or a diploma, unfortunately that would not be applicable for an E3.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Mohammed has a question. Mohammed is a medical lab technician, saying, got a job offer and finished the visa screen. How long would a medical lab technician take to be able to get to the United States?
I think it would. I think also, if depending on where you said a visa screen. So again, We were talking about the process earlier with that additional step, and depending on where Muhammad is in that process, I will say just in sum, the immigrant visa portion or scheduling the visa appointments, as we've been talking about, that process is the same for most people, right? But depending on if they are filing or have filed, the employer's filed for a perm labor certification or not, depending on where they are there, if it's at the very beginning, I could say probably about a year and a half, just given the government processing time. That's one thing that we've kind of been highlighting. Perm labor certification also through the Department of Labor has their own processing times. The employer is required to file a prevailing wage determination. And then also once the perm is ultimately filed, there are additional Department of Labor processing times. So, if it's from the very beginning, I generally quote anywhere from about a year and a half to 2 years as a conservative estimate. Now, remember, these estimates are always given because we're only kind of tracking monthly what's happening at each of these places or each of these government entities. But I give that conservative estimate, knowing that it can happen a little bit faster.
Okay, thank you, Sang. I'm just looking at the clock, and we have very limited time left and lots of questions. So I'm like racing through here, trying to see which questions we haven't asked. And there's a question here from Robin. Maria. Robin says, I was caught on retrogression and I have received my welcome letter from the NVC now. I changed my petitioner now and I'm required to submit my I-140 approval notice while filing my new I-140. My old petitioner is not providing the notice. I filed the FOIA, USCIS, but they couldn't find my records. Will the NVC have my notice? And do you think I need to file a FOIA in NVC since my papers have moved to the NVC? What advice would you give Robin, Maria?
So it sounds like she's trying, or he, I guess Robin could be a he or she, is trying to recapture a previous priority date. And there's sort of a list of things you could provide to the Immigration Service when you're going through that process of asking for the recapture. It's important to note that the recapture is always at the discretion of the Immigration Service. So even if you provided the best possible evidence, there's some chance they don't allow the recapture. But my experience has been that they're pretty amenable to giving you the old priority date as long as you have some paperwork showing that it existed. So that could be an I-140 approval notice. That's obviously the best evidence that we would have. Other things we might include would be like an I-140 receipt with a screenshot from the USCIS website showing that the I-140 was approved, even though we don't have the approval notice itself. If you have paperwork from the NVC, as Robin was mentioning, that shows your previous priority date, that could be submitted to the Immigration Service. Really any documentation you have, preferably from a government entity, that shows your name and some case ID, whether it's the NVC case ID or the I-140 receipt number, and then also your priority date, or as I mentioned, like a screenshot that confirms that the I-140 was approved. That recapture process, though, has to be done at the USCIS. It's not done at the NVC. So it's important that whatever that evidence is, that you're including it with the I-140 filing and requesting the recapture at that point in the process. If the case has already progressed to the NVC, the only way to get a recapture of a priority would be to send the case back to the USCIS, have them reopen the file, review the request for recapture, and then make a determination and send it back to the NVC, which is obviously quite a bit of extra time of processing. So it's important to try to get that documentation on the front end before the I-140 is filed, as opposed to waiting until the case reaches the NVC.
Yeah. And my heart just breaks for Robin and many other nurses in a similar situation who've been trying for many years to come to the United States. So Robin, we hope after all these efforts that you are able to get to the United States. Okay, so this will be the last few questions, everybody. So we have a question from David Salcido. I know David. David has a question saying about retrogression. How is the visa bulletin going to be for Filipino-born applicants for 2023? What is your comments on what you think is going to happen in the coming year?
So Maria was mentioning this earlier. There are kind of these unofficial, official individuals that always comment on what's going to happen in the upcoming year. As a practitioner, I read about those things, but I actually don't pay attention to them too much because, for Filipinos, Filipino nurses in EB3, it's current in October, right? And it's been current, I believe, for quite some time. So I think that we go month to month. We check when it comes out, and in my point of view, the forecast looks good for it to continue to stay current. But I mean, like I said, like there are some ways to kind of see what those might be, but there's nothing official that ever comes out until it's posted, right? And so my forecast is very optimistic always, and I think we're going to be good for 2023.
Okay, good. Well, we hope you're right, Sang.
Hope I'm right too.
Yeah, as we know, there's no way to tell 100%, but the one thing that we do know for sure, and that is that it's current right now. So if you are watching this, if you have not yet passed your NCLEX exam, if you are a registered nurse and you want to come to the United States, now is the time to apply for your NCLEX. Now is the time to apply to Kinetics USA, and we'd be happy to find you a petitioner. We have sponsors all over the United States. If you have a sister in California, a brother in New York, a friend in Florida, a relative in Texas, where Sang is, if you want to go to Ohio, wherever it is that you want to go, we have positions. So now is the time, because we know right now it is current. Okay, we're in the last few minutes. So Felicitas has a question. I had filed with a different agency and had to terminate my contract over placement. So what would happen if I would join Kinetics? So Felisa, that's actually a question for me. So basically what would happen is, first of all, you would need to get a release, always be ethical, always do the right thing, and get a release from the previous employer. You might have to pay out money. I'm not sure what you assigned. Once you've done that, you can get your I-140, and we can recapture that previously approved I-140, and we can get you an employer, hopefully that you will be happy with. Well, I know that you would be happy with. Rain has a question. This is going to be the last question, Maria. For Maria, what documents do we need to bring during the embassy interview?
So there's a specific list of civil documents that the NVC would have collected from you to get you through that to get you to a documentarily qualified sort of place that you can register or be scheduled for an interview, depending on which location you're in. You want to take all of those civil documents, but in their original form. So that's things like your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, if you have one, your passport, your visa screen, all of those documents that you would have collected previously and sent in copies, you now need to take the originals. And then in addition to that, you'll need to complete your medical exam before the interview takes place. And each embassy has sort of a different procedure for how that's accomplished. But most of the embassies will provide to you a list of physicians that are sort of approved to conduct that exam. And then either the physician will give you the exam in a sealed envelope that you carry to the embassy interview, or increasingly we're seeing that the physician will just send the exam straight through to the embassy and they'll have it there when you arrive. But as far as the documents that you need to carry, those are those civil documents in original form. And then depending on the time that's taken since your I-140 was approved and which embassy location you're at, you'll likely also need a letter from your employer in the U.S. that confirms the job that was provided or offered in the I-140 is still available and open, and that the employer, of course, still very much wants you to come to the U.S. And that's something most of the employers I think Kinetics works with are very used to, and have a letter kind of ready to go that they'll be able to provide to you in advance of your interview date.
Yes, we have a very structured set system that we work with both Sang and Maria and the Mozilla Unkenhal team on. And if you have questions about the consulate interview, I would encourage you to check out one of the Onwards and Upwards shows. It's called Back to Basics. It really tells you everything that you need to know about the process. And we have a whole segment that we do on the consulate interview. What are the documents? What are the questions questions you can typically expect, how to prepare yourself to make sure that you can make your American dream a reality, which is what we are all working towards. And you can see that on our social media, on our website. We also have a guidebook for you to download. This is free information only for all nurses to be able to learn about the process. So I want to finish off and thank Maria and Sang. This was a very informative hour. It was a lot of fun. Thank you to everybody for all your questions. And before you leave us, I just want to remind everybody about upcoming shows. So we have upcoming shows on the 20th. We have the Lafora Talk Show, Clinical Differences in the ED. On the 23rd, how to rent an apartment in the United States. On the 7th of October, a very important topic, next generation NCLEX exam. The NCLEX exam is going to be changing, and we're going to be learning about that. On the 14th, our legal expert panel will be back with immigration Q&A. On the 18th, we have the Lafora Talk Show, talking about the Philippine Nurse Association in the United States. And on the 21st, we have Stateside, where we highlight a specific state. North Carolina was the top contender in the poll. So we'll be talking about North Carolina. And on the 28th, we'll be talking about supporting your spouse through the transition. Our Kinetics College every Monday, 5 a.m. Pacific time. These are free classes, everybody. I saw there were questions about NCLEX, questions about the English exams. Please check the time in your country. And also, last but not least, the Kinetics initiatives. Just a few things to bear in mind. All Kinetics nurses and medtechs get a free English scholarship. We pay for a review course for you. This is part of our Kinetics care package. We have a free NCLEX scholarship. $1,000 referral fee ends for NCLEX, if you're to refer an NCLEX passer, ends on the 30th of September. Listen to our podcast, Nursing in America. We have a nurse aid program. Watch our show every Friday, Kinetics College every Monday. And if you're an allied worker, we have many opportunities for you around the world. So with that, I want to finish off. Thank you so much to Sang. Thank you so much to Maria. And have a great weekend, everybody. Onwards and upwards. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.